Hi, my name is Allison Lee, and today I'm here with Miss Alyssa Wang. So I was wondering if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Alyssa Wang, and I'm a conductor, a violinist, and a composer.
Yes, that's great. I'm here today as a member of the Classical Organization, which is an organization that promotes contemporary music to our community. And I have a list of questions that I prepared for you.
Right?
So I'll start with the big one. What is the initial inspiration behind your composition pieces? And if you could share some insights into your creative processes and like particularly how you begin new compositions.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start this off by saying that I haven't written a lot of music in my life. Basically, got four pieces that are out there and playable um, that I've written over the past maybe 6 years. So, not a ton to work with, but I think the thing that they all have in common is that they are all based on a really specific theme or narrative. Um, I have not a lot of success with writing pieces that I don't feel really strongly that they have a reason to exist, if that makes sense. So um, if I'm trying to write a narrative, a piece that has a narrative, I think it's really important for my own workflow that it's not any narrative, but it's a narrative that I feel is telling a story that needs to be told that hasn't been told yet, or something that's really compelling and personal to me that gives me the inspiration to finish the piece. I struggle the most with just finding inspiration to compose, which is why I haven't done it a lot. It's a very difficult process for me. So when I start pieces, the first thing that I have is the concept. Um, so I guess, for example, I wrote a solo violin work that was meant to be paired with a dancer. And the concept was that his motions were amplifying my emotions. And I named the piece Parallel Lines. Usually the title of the piece happens very early. It helps to conceptualize the whole work. And so I knew that right from the bat that I wanted a piece that was really heavily based in physicality and the way that my body looked. So that way the choreographer could kind of build off of that. So all of the beginnings of my works usually start with some kind of conceptual planning.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great to hear. Um, I saw in your bio that you were the music director of Cincinnati Ballet. And I was wondering if you could share anything you've learned from conducting like the orchestras and ballet productions and how that has changed the way you communicate with musicians.
Yes, I mean, I have been working with ballet dancers now for almost about 5 years. And I love working with ballet dancers because um, I'm really inspired by their work ethic. And I
Mhm.
really love how they are so free and they put everything out there when they're performing. So it's really taught me a lot about how to perform and be in the moment and commit to things in the performance. Because if they go out there and they do things half-heartedly, it doesn't really work. They really have to go 200%. So that's really inspired me as an artist. Um, it's also great to play to conduct ballet works that are written for ballet. So we play during in a regular orchestra season, we might do a Romeo and Juliet suite without dancers. But when you get to do Romeo and Juliet with dancers as it was originally intended, it really helps you understand more about the music and why it was written that way and the style that's needed when you have the dance element added in. Um, so yeah, it's taught me a lot about the styles of orchestra playing, how to make music sound more dance-like, and also just how to be really reliable with tempo because they're relying on me to be consistent with the tempo. So now my sense of like rhythm and pacing and everything is really, really sensitive because if you're off by even a little bit, then they can't really do their job. So it's really helped me to be as accurate as possible there.
That's very interesting. Also, as a conductor, violinist, and composer, could you explain how your three identities kind of influence each other? Well,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I started as a violinist, and the conducting and the composing came out as a branch from that. So everything that I do as a conductor and a composer is really based on my experiences as a violinist. Whether that's playing in orchestra, playing chamber music, all of that has really helped me know what to say to an orchestra, how to listen to ensemble and other tenets of orchestral playing. And then when I compose, I'm usually writing for violin, my instrument. So it's always my goal to write music that feels good to play. And I think that's because I write it on my instrument. So I'm usually sitting there with my violin and maybe a piano and doing a lot of improvisation. And a lot of the composition kind of comes from that improvisation. So without violin, I would not be a conductor. I would not be a composer. And that's why I think I don't want to stop playing because if I have that connection, then it grounds me and gives me all the answers that I
hmm, wow. Thank you for sharing that. Is there any other piece that you would like to share the key musical ideas or themes that you explored in?
see. I just the last piece that I premiered was a string octet that I was commissioned to write by the Boston Chamber Music Society. Um, they gave me very free rein on it, and so I wrote a piece that's sort of a metaphor for protest, with the idea being that if you're a singular voice trying to change the world, that you're going to be outnumbered by all of the other forces that are against you. But if you band with others and work together, then you have a much higher chance of being able to overcome the trials and tribulations of your life. So I embedded into it a protest chant, um, and I also had like an oppressive force represented that interrupted the solo voices as a metaphor for maybe like a government silencing its people or some kind of violence like silencing protesters. And then as the piece goes on, the solo voices become duos and trios and quartets until there's no more people on the opposite side and it's all just everybody together. And then everybody goes off on a dance, and the whole second half of the octet is a dance. So, um, yeah, that was the concept behind the most recent piece that I wrote. And I don't have any concepts in the future immediately, but I do have ideas that I really want to do. But I think they're not very close to being realized yet. But that was most recent.
Wow, that's so interesting. When you compose, do you usually like begin with an emotional idea or like a musical motive or maybe like something visual?
Um, I definitely tried to come up with some kind of musical grounding. So I use the same concept in my violin concerto and in the octet, where I had a melody that was embedded throughout every section, but not in its true form. So in my violin concerto, the melody doesn't actually arrive until the middle of the last movement, but you hear fragments and distortions of it in both the first and the second movement. I do a similar thing in the octet, and I think that it does a really like kind of interesting um, psychological experience as a listener because by the time you hear the melody, the idea is that I feel like this is familiar. I feel like I've heard this before, when really you've heard manipulations of it. And so you have this really satisfying feeling when you finally get to the melody as it's intended.
Wow, that's so cool. Oh my God. Let me think. Is there any like new directions or unexplored areas within music composition that you're particularly excited to delve into your future projects?
I mean, I really hope one day to write more ballet music.
Wow.
Uh, I find that there's an abundance of choreographers and there is a lack of composers.
Mm,
All of the best ballets were completed with a choreographer and a composer working in tandem. So if you think of Balanchine and Shostakovich, right? I mean, sorry, Stravinsky.
mm,
Balanchine and Stravinsky is like the premier example. Two artists creating in their own medium at the same time, and that's how we got Firebird. That's how we got, all of these, symphony in three movements and things like that. So I think uh, when a choreographer and a composer get together and there's a lot of synergy between them, then great ballets happen. Um, and I just feel like there's not a lot of new ballets coming out that have new music. There's a lot of new ballets coming out that have old music written by composers who have already were long gone.
mm,
That's very common, but I would love to add to the ballet genre.
mm. Um, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges faced by contemporary composers and performers within the classical music industry today?
Well, I think they each have their own struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, with contemporary composers, there is a struggle to earn a living and be paid to write music. So commissions are very far and few in between. Often they don't pay very much. Um, and there is a phenomenon that happens where a small group of composers kind of grab the attention of all the major orchestras. And I don't want to say hog the resources, but um, once you're in the circuit, you're in the circuit. But it's very hard to break into the circuit, is kind of how I would put it. Um, and then I think also contemporary composers struggle with repeat playing of their pieces. So the excitement of the world premiere will carry them through, but it doesn't mean that their piece is going to be played again. So second, third, fourth performances of a new work, definitely a challenge for contemporary composers. Um, for performers, a lot of it is just how do we get audiences to be interested in music and the to take the risk of seeing a piece that they've never seen before that might not be to their taste. The truth is that in every era, new music was filled with things that got lost into history. Right? When we think of Mozart composing in Salzburg, there were hundreds of composers in Salzburg along with Mozart, but we only know one of them. And that happens through all of history. So it doesn't mean that everyone except for Mozart was bad. It just means that it's very hard for your pieces to have staying power. So, um, yeah, I think getting audiences interested in new music and taking that risk and deciding for themselves, does this piece stand the test of time? I think a lot of performers struggle to get audiences as excited as them about it. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Kind of going into that question as well. Um, how do you think you can how can contemporary classical music be made more accessible to a wider audience? And do you think there are any specific strategies or initiatives you believe would be effective in generalizing its appeal?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think composers really have to ask why a lot more than they currently are. Why should people care about this piece of written? Why does it matter to the community that you're playing it for? Why does this piece deserve to exist? And it's a very harsh way of thinking. I know that a lot of people feel that music kind of speaks for itself or that it's self-determining, that it just has value just by being. And that may be true in some regards, but if we're talking about audience appeal and accessibility, I really think that composers and programmers need to be asking really strongly, why are we doing this? Because if you can answer the question of why compellingly, it will be easier for you to convince audiences that they need to listen to it. And it'll be easier to convince audiences at the concert that this is a piece that they're going to enjoy. Um, I also think you've really got to contextualize the piece to the audience because, especially if it's something they've never heard before, they're not going to know anything about the background of you or what the piece is about or what to listen for. So um, I think performers and composers should really get used to speaking to audiences at their concerts and giving that context really, really helps the audiences a lot to understand what's going on. They don't feel as lost in the experience. Um, and, I think organizations that are trying to promote new music and program new music just have to think about their specific community and what art is going to resonate with that. Because every community is different. Um, every community has a different demographic, different groups that are represented, and you want art that reflects your community. I think that's a good goal. And so that means that not every orchestra or every programming organization is going to have the same strategy. It's going to program the same kind of music. It really just depends on the region. Here on Cape Cod, we have a very unique audience demographic. Not only does the age skew older, but also a lot of the Cape Cod population doesn't live on Cape year round. They actually only come for the summer. So the residents who live here year round are really different than the residents who come in the summer. Um, and then we also have a geographic problem with one end of the Cape being sometimes an hour and a half away from the other end of the Cape. So these are all things we have to consider when we talk about programming with the Cape Symphony. And every orchestra should be doing this, just trying to address the problems and that are unique to your community and the solutions that will solve those problems. And they will be different from solutions that other orchestras come to.
Mm. Wow. There's a lot of students today that don't really know how to start or understand modern classical music, and I was wondering if you had any tips for them.
This is such a good question. I would just say that modern classical music spans every possible genre you could possibly go. So to say that you don't like modern music tells me that you haven't found the type of modern music that you like yet. Because there is modern music out there that you like, I promise you. And it's a matter of trying to have as many listening experiences as possible and maybe finding a composer to style you really like and following their journey and seeing what they release. Um, I am not personally a fan of the hyper experimental, um, sort of maximalist music that was maybe popular 75 years ago. Um, I am a really big fan of hyper minimalism. Um, I love long form minimalist music. Um, and so composers who kind of deal with scope and scale on a large form using very little is something that I discovered I really like. That might be something that you don't like, and that's fine. Some people really like music that sounds cinematic. There's a lot of classical music now that's being written that sounds a lot like soundtrack music. It's very popular. I think soundtrack music in like video game music totally counts as classical music too, by the way. So, if you like Studio Ghibli, then you like music, right? It's all the same.
Mhm.
So I think we want to disassociate the term new music from scary, ugly music because there's a lot of new music that is easy listening and beautiful. And if that's your jam, there's a lot of stuff out there for you.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that concludes our interview today. And
Great.
Um, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you. And I'm so grateful for this chance to talk to you again and hear about your perspective and your story as a contemporary musician and composer.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you be comfortable with this interview being republished in a future book or podcast format?
Yes, totally. Totally.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much again, and I hope
Great.
you have an amazing week, and thank you.
Thank you. This was really lovely. Good question. And I love your project and I hope you're very successful and these endeavors. I can't wait to see what gets put out there.
Yay. Thank you and bye.
Thank you. Have
Bye.
a great day.
You too.